All right, joining us right now, though, to talk about his new bestseller is Dan Balz. Dan Balz is the chief correspondent at the Washington Post and its former national editor, political editor, and White House correspondent. He's the author of Collision, 2012, Obama versus Romney and the Future of Elections in America. I hold that up for our Newsmax TV audience to see. Hello, Dan. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Steve. How are you?
Well, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I got to tell you, as a political junkie, I can't think of anything, to be honest with you, that I'd rather pick up a book and read about, because the inside of a presidential election, how it turned, why it turned, the stuff I wasn't privy to during it all, and even in the aftermath, you've had some probably the most extensive exclusive interview with Mitt Romney since it. So to me, this is just stuff that I just need to have.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I hope your listeners feel the same way. I mean, it's a fascinating story. The 2008 campaign was obviously, historic and uplifting and aspirational, if you will. This was a lot more trench warfare, but I thought that by the end of this campaign, we learned a lot more about the country we're in and the kind of the divisions that we face, and it all added up with the cast of characters that we had to work with into just a really interesting story to try to retell.
Well, let me ask you this, and let me start maybe at the end here and not the beginning. How on earth did it turn out that, against all projections, that and even common sense would dictate that it wouldn't happen this way, but you had the excitement of 2008 with the first black president on the ticket, or candidate on the ticket for a major party, and you had the huge black turnout, the huge Democratic turnout, and all that to elect this man. How was it that a lot of that turnout was even greater, again, against all odds, common sense, and projections in 2012?
Well, the Romney campaign was asking themselves that question the morning after the election, that's for sure. They certainly did not anticipate that African-American turnout would be anything close to what we saw in 2008. Now, overall, turnout was down a little bit, and particularly in some of the non-battleground states. But in general, turnout was pretty strong. I think one reason in the African-American community, for example, there was a feeling that if Obama were not reelected, it would almost, in a sense, invalidate the first election. And we saw these huge lines of people waiting to vote in Florida for some of the early vote in the final few days. And, for example, in Philadelphia, the city precincts in Philadelphia, just big turnout of African Americans. And I think there was a kind of as some of the Obama people said, there was a kind of a feeling of, we've got his back, and we're going to be there if he needs us, and it looks like he needs us, so we're going to turn out. Similarly, I think that the Romney team did not think that turnout of young voters would be anywhere close to what it was. They thought that young people had been highly energized by the 2008 campaign and were somewhat dispirited by what had happened since, particularly because the job market was so tough, especially for a lot of young people. And yet youth turnout was pretty strong as well. And so there was just part of that was that there was still enough enthusiasm among the Democratic base for Obama. Part of it was that the Obama campaign worked very, very hard to identify anybody who might be likely to vote for the president, and went out and found ways to get them to the polls as best they could.
We're talking to Dan Balz, the author of Collision 2012, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Let me ask you this. How big a mistake was it, after debate number one, where Mitt Romney, just dominated Barack Obama? Do you believe that he relaxed and tried to rest on those laurels? And how big a mistake was it for him not to press on Benghazi, not to fight back on Benghazi? And I almost as an aside, the Candy Crowley mistake, because it was a mistake, he did not call specifically Benghazi an act of terror in the Rose Garden. But that aside, I mean, he could have made a bigger issue out of Benghazi and really never said anything about it. So those two things, what do you think?
In that second presidential debate at Hofstra, I thought that Governor Romney was pretty aggressive throughout, but I think the big difference was that President Obama was also aggressive. And, in the way these kinds of events get looked at and covered, sometimes it's less important the words and more important kind of the body language and the tone and tenor. And I think everybody went into that debate with one question in mind, and that is, would the President Obama who was at the first debate show up again, or would this be a different and more aggressive President Obama? And so I think that debate turned much more simply on the fact that the president was as aggressive or a little more aggressive than Mitt Romney. Now, on the Benghazi moment, it's a very interesting question. Mitt Romney, as he went through all of the debates that he went through as a seeking a Republican nomination, was, I always thought, extremely well prepared. He knew his brief and he knew his opponent's weaknesses. In one debate or another, he had to worry about Newt Gingrich, or he had to worry about Rick Santorum, and in all of those cases, he was armed with information that sort of caught them unawares. This was a case in which, when the president said he had called it an acts of terror, which I believe were his exact words in the Rose Garden, Governor Romney was a little bit flummoxed, and what he failed to do at that moment was to say, well, you may have used the generic term acts of terror in the Rose Garden, but immediately after that, when you were pressed about calling that specific episode an act of terror, you were unwilling to do so. But instead, I think he was caught off guard by that, and in one way or another didn't have in mind the whole sequence of how the president had handled it. And so it made it easier for the president to essentially win that argument, put Candy Crowley aside, to win that argument at that moment.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that the whole topic of Benghazi in general, he never brought up. And with the Candy Crowley, again, he said, at the very end of that Rose Garden appearance, he said, we will not let acts of terror. But that was in the context, I think, if you look at it objectively, of 9/11 itself and the 9/11 anniversary and going forward and acts of terror. But when he came out and talked about Benghazi, he certainly did not call that an act of terror specifically. So, but again, and Candy Crowley then.
Here's what I would say about the issue of the moderator. No good debater that I've watched ever lets a moderator really get in the way, and we saw Newt Gingrich demolish moderators.
Absolutely.
In some of the things. I mean, I think it's up to the two people who are on the stage seeking the presidency to decide what to do at a moment like that, and he chose to step back.
Right.
Now, I think more significantly, the third debate, which was a debate about foreign policy. I mean, the debate at Hofstra was a town hall meeting.
Right.
That's a different animal to deal with because you're getting questions from the audience. It's sometimes a little more difficult to be too aggressive when you've got an audience of regular people sitting around. But in the foreign policy debate, Benghazi was almost not an issue, and he didn't press it in that debate.
Right.
And I think that's the question. They made a strategic decision for their own reasons that he was not going to be overly aggressive in that debate. That in some sense he was doing a little bit of hugging the president on some of these issues rather than taking him to task. And so that was a strategic choice on the part of the Romney campaign about how they were going to handle that moment or that debate.
Do you believe that a Republican candidate is getting a fair shake from the media? Do you believe Romney did? I mean, I think back to his foreign trip when some reporter, I'll never forget this visual, was Governor Romney, what about your latest gaffe? And remember, it was the gaffe trip, the overseas gaffe trip. Everything he did was a gaffe. We just had President Obama sitting with Jay Leno. He mistakenly said that Vladimir Putin was the head of the KGB. He never was. He misidentified the Olympic Games, the events in the games that would be in Russia. He had the event, the two Olympics mixed up. And he said that we have to widen our ports in the Gulf to let the new ships that are going to be coming through the Suez Canal. And he specifically said Charleston, South Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida. That's not the Gulf Coast. So, I mean, 3 mistakes on Jay Leno that nobody has said boo about, that if it were George Bush, if it were Republican probable for 2016, that's all you'd hear about. And I could sit here and Dan, for the next 5 hours, give you these examples.
Well, let's put aside. I mean, we're trying to talk about the campaign,
right? But I'm just saying,
of the moment. In the campaign, I think it's fair to say Governor Romney got tougher coverage than President Obama got. But in part, I think that's a reflection not necessarily of bias in the media, but in part on how skillful a campaign is at dealing with the media. And from knowing the people who were embedded with the campaigns and how they were treated and what access they got or didn't get, there is a frustration level that builds up. And a smart campaign knows how to deal with the press at a lot of different levels, whether it's the people who are traveling day to day, whether it's some of the other national reporters, whether it's TV interviewers, whether it's an investigative reporter. I mean, one of the problems that the Romney campaign had is that they were often reluctant to deal at the front end with kind of investigative pieces that were being done, and then they would object to them after they had come out. And I talked to somebody who had been in an earlier Romney campaign who said that in the first campaign they worked very hard whenever they found out that a reporter was working on a story that might be challenging. They worked hard to make sure they were able to give as much as they could of their side of that story, and I'm not sure that the Romney campaign did that as effectively. Now, press politician relations are difficult, but it's part of what you need to do as a presidential candidate is to manage those relationships, if
Absolutely.
you will, to manage that. And if you look back in 2008, I don't think Romney got harsh coverage. John McCain felt he got unfair coverage.
Oh, well, I could go on and on about what they did to Sarah Palin the second she was announced.
But in 2000, John McCain got great coverage. So, it goes back and forth.
Quick question. We got a minute. Hillary on the Democratic side in 2016?
Well, she starts out as the front runner, obviously.
Okay. Can anybody beat her if she runs?
She will be hard to beat, but people said she would be hard to beat in 2008. Now,
okay.
There's no Barack Obama on the horizon in the Democratic Party at this point, but we're a long way away from
We got less than a minute, so just quick. Biden dead as far as the chances?
Well, if Hillary Clinton runs, I don't think Joe Biden will run.
Okay, interesting. Now, Republican side. Who do you see emerging? Christie can't win a Republican primary. Do you agree?
I don't know that. I mean, I think one of the choices that the Republicans are going to have to make is in what direction do they go in terms of a nominee? Do they look for somebody who they think can present the conservative philosophy in a sense in a much more robust way than either they thought that Romney or John McCain could? Do they look for that kind of candidate, or do they look for somebody who they think is not quite perfect on all of the issues, but who might be able to convert some blue states to red?
Dan Balz, the book is Collision